The desert doesn't lie. It doesn't dress things up. It doesn't hide what it is. The sun burns everything it touches. The wind carries sand that cuts like glass. And the silence, that deep, aching silence, it swallows men whole. They say the Sonoran Desert has claimed more souls than any war ever fought on American soil. Not through bullets, not through blades, but through thirst, through heat, through the kind of loneliness that makes a man question everything he ever believed about himself. And it was in that desert, in the kind of place where hope goes to die, that a man named Caleb Dune rode alone. He wasn't running from anything, or at least that's what he told himself. He was just a drifter, a man between places, a man whose past sat heavier on his chest than his saddlebag ever could. But destiny has a strange way of finding men who try to disappear. And what Caleb found that morning, half buried in the red sand, left for dead, breathing like the last flame of a dying fire, would change everything, would break him open, would force him to become someone he hadn't been in a very long time, someone worth knowing. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Sending love your way wherever you are. Because this story, this one isn't just about the Wild West. It's about what happens when two lost souls find each other in the most unlikely place on earth, and what one of them was willing to sacrifice to save the other. Stay with me. Caleb Dune was the kind of man who entered a town quietly and left the same way. No fanfare, no trouble sought, just a horse, a bedroll, a rifle strapped to his saddle, and eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. He was 34 years old, though he looked closer to 40. The desert does that to a man. So does grief. The two together are merciless. His face was leather brown from years under an open sky. A jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 2 weeks. A scar that ran from just below his left ear down to his collar. A souvenir from a knife fight in Tucson 3 years back that he didn't like to talk about. He rode a chestnut mare named Belle. She was the one steady thing in his life. The one creature that never judged him, never left him, never asked him to explain himself. Just carried him forward, day after day after day. That particular morning, in the early days of October 1871, Caleb was riding east through the lower Sonoran. He had no destination that mattered. He'd heard there was work near a place called Copper Ridge, a mining settlement that needed men who could handle dynamite and weren't too particular about the company they kept. It wasn't glamorous, but it was money, and money meant food for him and grain for Belle. The sky that morning was the color of hammered copper. Not quite dawn, not quite day. That in-between hour when the desert holds its breath. Coyotes had stopped calling. The birds hadn't started yet. Just the soft, rhythmic sound of hooves in sand and the occasional creak of his saddle leather. He almost missed her. Belle stopped first. The mare pulled up sharp, her ears flattening, her nostrils flaring. Caleb's hand went to his rifle instinctively. 3 years of drifting had sharpened his instincts to a knife's edge. He scanned the landscape, scrub brush, saguaro cactus standing like sentinels against the pale sky, scattered rocks the color of dried blood. Then he saw it, a shape, low to the ground, half covered in sand as if the desert were trying to swallow it. At first he thought it was a deer, or maybe a coyote that had given up the fight. He nudged Belle forward slowly, rifle still in hand. It wasn't a deer. It was a woman. She was lying face down in the sand, her dark hair spread out around her like a broken wing. She was dressed in clothing he recognized as Apache, a high dress, stitched with careful detail, now torn and stained with something dark and terrible at her left side. Her feet were bare. Her hands were pressed flat against the earth as if she were trying to push herself up and simply had nothing left to push with. Caleb swung down from Belle before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. He knelt beside her, pressed 2 fingers to her neck, a pulse, thin as a thread, but there. He turned her over carefully, and when he saw her face, his chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years. Not attraction, not in that moment. Something older. Something that came from a place deeper than desire. Something closer to recognition. The feeling of looking at someone and understanding, without a single word spoken, that this person has suffered. She was young, perhaps 25. Her face was strong-boned and striking even now, even like this, but her lips were cracked raw from dehydration. Her left side, where the dark stain spread, had been torn open. A wound, knife or arrow, he couldn't tell yet, and it was infected. He could smell it, sweet and wrong. She wasn't going to survive another hour in this sun. Caleb looked around. Nothing and nobody for as far as he could see in any direction. Just desert. Just silence. Just him and this woman and a choice. He knew what some men would do. Ride on. Tell themselves it wasn't their problem. Tell themselves they'd never survive being caught near an Apache woman. That whatever trouble had found her would find them too if they lingered. He'd known men who would have thought that way and slept fine that night. Caleb was not those men. He pulled his canteen from the saddle, tilted a small amount of water between her lips. She stirred slightly, made a sound like a wounded animal, small and raw and human. "Easy," he said quietly. "I've got you." He couldn't explain why he said it. She probably didn't understand a word of English, and even if she did, she was barely conscious. But it felt necessary, like the words were for him as much as for her. He tore a strip from his spare shirt and pressed it to her wound. She flinched hard, her eyes flying open for just a moment. Dark as obsidian, sharp even through the haze of pain, and then they closed again. Caleb assessed the situation with the cold practicality of a man who had survived by thinking clearly under pressure. She needed water. She needed the wound cleaned and bound. She needed shade. She needed rest. And she needed all of those things right now, not in an hour, not after he deliberated. He had a partial canteen. He had some clean cloth. He had jerky and hardtack that he could spare. He had a canvas tarp rolled behind his saddle. It wasn't much, but it was enough to try. He set up a lean-to against a large boulder using the tarp and 2 sticks, laying her in the narrow band of morning shadow it created. He cleaned the wound with the last of his whiskey, a sacrifice he noted with dry humor, and wrapped it as tightly as he dared without cutting off circulation. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the stranger whose life had somehow just become his responsibility. "Who did this to you?" he murmured. The desert gave him no answer. But the woman, barely alive, barely breathing, somehow impossibly, almost seemed to be listening. She didn't wake until sundown. Caleb had spent the day doing what he could. He'd found a dry creek bed about a quarter-mile west where a small seep of groundwater collected in a rocky basin. Not much, barely more than a trickle, but enough. He'd filled his canteen twice over and come back. He'd given Belle the first drink, because a dead horse meant a dead man, and a dead man couldn't save anyone. Then he'd come back to the lean-to and waited. He built a small fire when the sun dropped and the temperature plummeted the way it always did in the desert, that violent swing from brutal heat to bone-deep cold that happened in the space of an hour. He kept it small, low, a fire that gave heat but not much light. Out here, a fire after dark was a signal. He didn't know who had put this woman in the sand, and he didn't intend to invite them to finish the job. He was chewing on a strip of jerky and watching the stars come out, enormous and close, the way they only ever are in the open desert, when she made a sound. Not a word, not a cry, just a sharp intake of breath, like someone surfacing from deep water. He turned immediately. Her eyes were open, and they were locked on him with an intensity that hit him like a physical thing. There was no grogginess in her gaze, no confusion of someone slowly waking. She came back to consciousness the way a predator does, instantly, fully aware. Her hand moved toward her hip, looking for something that wasn't there. A knife. She'd had a knife and it was gone. Lost somewhere in the desert or taken by whoever had done this to her. "You won't find it," Caleb said quietly, holding both his hands up and away from his own weapons. "I'm not going to hurt you. I found you this morning. You were half dead." She stared at him. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes moved over him, reading him the way a tracker reads ground, taking inventory of who he was and what he intended. He reached for the canteen slowly, making sure she could see every movement. He held it out toward her. She didn't take it. "Water," he said. Then, because he'd spent enough time in this territory to pick up fragments of different languages, he tried the Apache word. 2. Something shifted in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, not remotely, but acknowledgement. The recognition that this man had made an effort. She took the canteen, drank from it herself, controlled, measured. Not gulping like someone who'd lost their senses to desperation. She was disciplined even now. Even like this. She handed it back. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and even, roughened by dehydration but not broken. The words were Apache, and Caleb caught only fragments, but the tone told him everything. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't grateful exactly. She was assessing. He shook his head slowly. I don't understand most of that. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in careful, deliberate English that surprised him like cold water, You are alone. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. No men with you. No. She looked at the fire. At the lean-to he'd built. At the simple camp he'd constructed around her while she was unconscious. Taking it all in. My name, she said finally, is Desta. He nodded slowly. Caleb. Caleb Dune. She repeated it to herself under her breath, as if committing it to memory. Caleb Dune. Who hurt you, Desta? He asked. He kept his voice steady, not pushing, not demanding. Just asking. She looked at him for a long moment. The fire popped between them, sending a small column of orange sparks up into the black sky. Men from Harlan's outfit, she said. The name landed in Caleb's chest like a stone dropped into still water. Harlan. He knew that name. Everyone in this part of the territory knew that name. Fletcher Harlan was a cattle baron and land grabber who'd been pushing into Apache territory for 2 years, with the quiet blessing of certain politicians in Tucson who benefited from looking the other way. He wasn't just a man with money and ambition. He was a man with hired violence, 20, maybe 30 guns on his payroll at any given time. Men who had no law over them and knew it. What happened? Caleb asked. Desta was quiet for a beat. Not reluctant, composing. Choosing her words the way a person does when they want to be precise. My people have a camp, she said. 3 days east. Harlan's men came 4 days ago. Said the land was his. My uncle refused to move. They shot him. A pause. Clean and hard as a blade. I rode for help. They followed. Your family, they're still there? Yes. How many of Harlan's men followed you? 4. I killed one. She said it plainly, without pride or apology. Just fact. Caleb absorbed that. 3 men. Somewhere between here and 3 days east. Possibly tracking her. Possibly thinking she was already dead. Possibly returning to Harlan to report. You need to rest, he said. You're not healed. And you? She asked, studying him with those dark, direct eyes. Why do you stay? It was a fair question. A real one. Not rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to understand his motivation, and Caleb understood instinctively that she'd see through a lie. He thought about it for a moment. Because riding on didn't feel like something I could do, he said finally. And I've already done too many things that didn't feel right. Something moved across Desta's face. Not quite a smile, but something like respect beginning to form, careful, tentative, like the first green shoot after a frost. She lay back down without another word. But she didn't close her eyes immediately. She kept watching him. Steady. Measuring. And somewhere in the dark beyond the fire's light, something moved through the brush. Caleb heard it a half-second before Belle did. A sound that didn't belong. The faint, careful placement of a hoof on hard ground. The specific sound of an animal being ridden slowly, deliberately, by someone who didn't want to be heard. Belle tossed her head. Her eyes caught the firelight. Caleb was on his feet before conscious thought, his rifle in his hands, moving low, away from the fire, into the darkness at the edge of camp. He pressed himself against the boulder that anchored the lean-to. He glanced back. Desta was already sitting up. Her eyes were wide and alert. She held one finger to her lips. She'd heard it too. Then she held up 3 fingers. 3. She could tell from the sound alone. Caleb trusted that. He raised his rifle, scanning the darkness beyond camp. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then the voice came from the south. "Hey now." Low, drawling, the voice of a man comfortable with menace. "Don't go and do something stupid." Caleb didn't answer. "We can see your fire, friend. We saw it an hour ago. Figured we'd come say hello." A pause. Then, with mock warmth, "We're looking for something we lost. An Apache girl. You seen anything like that?" Still Caleb said nothing. The voice shifted. Lost the friendliness. "There's 3 of us and we can see you against that rock. I'm being polite right now. That won't last forever." Caleb's mind worked quickly. 3 men. Probably spread out. If they'd been watching the fire for an hour, they'd had time to position. Which meant he was the one at disadvantage, backlit by the flames. He did the only thing that gave him a chance. He kicked dirt over the fire. Darkness dropped like a curtain. He moved immediately left, fast, low to the ground, away from where he'd been standing. 3 seconds later, a gunshot cracked from the south, and a bullet hit the rock exactly where he'd been standing. Then 2 more shots in quick succession, both aimed at the darkness where they thought he'd moved. They were guessing. Caleb wasn't. He'd spent 3 years moving through darkness in places that would kill a lesser man. His eyes adjusted fast. He found the muzzle flash from the second shot and tracked it. A man crouched behind a clump of Palo Verde, 30 yards out. He fired once. A cry. A body dropping. 2. Movement to his left. He rolled right just as another shot threw up dirt where his knee had been a moment before. He came up behind a cactus. Poor cover, but it disrupted his silhouette and held his breath, listening. Boots on hard ground. Someone circling. West. And then, from behind him, the sound of a struggle. He spun. The 3rd man had come from the north, quiet as smoke, and gone for Desta. But she was not what he'd expected. Even wounded, even with her left side screaming with every movement, Desta had gotten low, gotten to the side of the lean-to, and when the man lunged for her, she'd driven her elbow up into his throat with the precision of someone trained from childhood. He staggered. She was on her feet. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, and drove him face-first into the boulder with a sound like green wood splitting. He didn't get up. The second man, the one Caleb had been tracking, came around from the west, and Caleb stepped directly into his path with the rifle barrel 6 inches from the man's face. "Drop it," Caleb said. The man froze. His eyes went from Caleb's face to the rifle to the darkness around them, calculating. "Counting to 3, Caleb said. No heat in his voice. That flat, factual tone that told a man this wasn't a negotiation. The gun hit the sand. Caleb disarmed him, zip-tied his wrists with a length of rope from his saddlebag, and secured him to a saguaro. Not comfortable, not meant to be. Then he went to Desta. She was standing upright, breathing hard, holding her left side. The wound had pulled open, a dark stain spreading again through the fresh bandage. Her face was tight with pain, but her eyes were hard and clear. "Are you?" he started. "The wound opened," she said. "It will need to be closed again." Just like that. Not a complaint. Not panic. A simple assessment of the situation. Caleb rebuilt the fire. Low again. He re-cleaned and redressed the wound, his hands steady, his jaw tight against the intimacy of it. The trust required on both sides, for this stranger to let him do this and for him to do it with the care it required. She didn't make a sound. Not when he cleaned it. Not when he pressed the cloth down hard to stop the bleeding. Her hands were flat on the ground on either side of her, pressing into the earth, and that was the only sign that it hurt. When it was done, she met his eyes. "You shoot well," she said. "You fight better," he replied. She almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth moved, the ghost of something warmer passing across her face and disappearing just as quickly. In the morning, Caleb questioned the surviving rider. The man's name was Breck. He was surly and defiant at first, the way men always were when they were still calculating their odds. But Caleb had a gift for stillness, the kind of stillness that made men nervous because it looked too much like indifference. Eventually Breck talked. Harlan knew where the Apache camp was. He'd already sent another group, 5 men, better armed. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to clear the land. Caleb looked at Desta across the dying fire. Her face had gone very still. The kind of stillness that comes after the heart understands something the mind is still catching up to. "How long?" she asked Breck. He shrugged. "They left yesterday morning." Desta stood up. She swayed slightly from the pain, steadied herself, and looked at Caleb with eyes that had moved past desperation into something harder and colder and more resolute. "I need to go," she said, and Caleb knew with absolute certainty that he was going with her. They left Breck tied to the saguaro with enough slack in the rope to free himself by midday. It wasn't mercy exactly. It was calculation. A dead man would bring a search. A man who walked back to Harlan's outfit with his tail between his legs sent a different message. Caleb wasn't sure yet what message he wanted to send. He helped Desta onto Belle, an arrangement the horse accepted with her usual grace. He walked at Belle's side for the first 2 miles, until they found what he'd hoped to find. One of the fallen rider's horses, a gray gelding, still ground-tied where his rider had left him. Spooked but not gone. Caleb talked him down with low, patient sounds, and they rode on together. The desert stretched east in every direction. Flat and vast and indifferent. They rode mostly in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of strangers with nothing to say, but the working silence of 2 people who are thinking, processing, preparing. The kind of silence that has substance. Desta rode straight-backed despite the wound. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye. The pain was there. He could see it in the slight tightening of her jaw each time the horse moved over rough ground. But she carried it without drama, without seeking acknowledgement. She simply absorbed it and moved forward. He respected that more than he knew how to say. Around midday, they stopped at the shadow of a red rock formation to water the horses and eat. Desta ate without complaint, the hardtack and jerky he offered, though he suspected she found it tasteless and inadequate. He would have too in her position. "Tell me about the camp," he said. "How many people?" She calculated. 30, perhaps 35. Old men, children, some women who can fight. 8 or 10 younger men. Against 5 of Harlan's guns. "Harlan's men are experienced killers," she said. It wasn't fear speaking. It was honesty. "So are some of your people, I'd imagine," he said. "Yes, but the children are not." There it was. The weight of it. The thing that made her push through the pain and keep riding. Not pride, not vengeance, not territory. The children. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What will Harlan's men do when they get there?" he asked. "Burn the camp," she said. "Drive the people out. Shoot anyone who resists." "And your uncle, the one they shot?" "He is still alive, I think. He was alive when I left. But barely." She paused. "He is our leader, our decision-maker. Without him, there will be confusion. Fear." Caleb turned this over in his mind. "Why did you go alone?" he asked. "For help, I mean. Why not send someone less?" He chose the word carefully. "Less essential." She looked at him directly. "Because I am fast. And because I know this territory better than anyone else in the camp. A beat. And because no one would expect them to send a woman." She said it without bitterness. Just clarity. Caleb nodded slowly. He understood tactical thinking. He appreciated it. "Where were you going?" he asked. "Before I found you. There is a settlement. Fort Breckenridge, or what was it? Now just a trading post. A man there, Reyes, has helped us before. He has connections. Sometimes riders who can be hired." Caleb knew the place. He'd been through it 18 months ago. He remembered Reyes. A compact, quiet Mexican man with quick eyes and a reputation for fairness in a territory where that was rarer than rain. "We can't make Fort Breckenridge in time," Caleb said. "Not and reach your camp first." "No," Desta agreed. Her voice was neutral, but her hands tightened slightly on the saddle horn. "So it's just us," he said. She looked at him. That direct, measuring look he was beginning to recognize. the look that weighed a person carefully before trusting them with anything important. "Why?" she asked. "You could go to Breckenridge yourself. Bring men. Come back." "I could," he said. "But you will not." "No." "Why?" she asked again. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the heat shimmer over the desert floor. "I knew a man once," he said finally. "Good man. Family man. He had land that someone wanted. The kind of wanting that doesn't stop at asking. The kind backed by lawyers and guns." He paused. "I wasn't there when it happened. I was 3 towns over, minding my own business." Another pause. "Longer this time. I've been minding my own business ever since. It gets heavier, not lighter." Desta said nothing. She let the silence sit with him. Didn't try to fill it or fix it. That alone told him something important about her. "You need a woman like me," she said suddenly. He blinked. "What?" She wasn't looking at him. She was looking east, toward wherever her people were. "A woman who speaks plainly," she said. "Who does not dress things in soft words. You carry guilt like a stone, but you keep riding. That means the stone has not crushed you. It means you are still looking for somewhere to put it down." She glanced at him sideways. "Today may be that place." Caleb stared at her. He'd been drifting for 3 years. Through towns and camps and empty stretches of nowhere. He talked to hundreds of people and most of them had bounced off him like water off stone. This woman, who had known him for barely a day, had seen directly into the center of him and spoken what she found there without flinching. He didn't know what to do with that, so he did the only thing he knew how to do. He nudged the gray gelding east. "Let's ride," he said, and Desta rode beside him, into the copper afternoon, toward whatever was waiting on the other side of the horizon. They smelled the smoke before they saw it. That sick, particular smell. Not the clean smoke of a cooking fire or the pine-sweet smoke of a winter hearth. This was the smell of things that weren't meant to burn. Hides, cloth, wood that had been lived in. It carried something human in it, something intimate and violated, and it hit Caleb in the base of his stomach like a fist. He saw Desta's face when the smell reached her. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. Her expression didn't collapse the way he expected. Instead, it went very still, perfectly, dangerously still, and her eyes locked on the horizon and didn't move. She nudged her horse into a gallop. Caleb followed. They crested a low mesa as the sun was beginning its descent, and below them, in a wide bowl between 2 red rock walls, was what remained of the camp. 3 structures were burning. 2 others had already burned down to their frames. Smoke rose in slow columns against the orange sky. People were moving below, some running, some hunched over, others on the ground, some standing absolutely still the way people do when the mind has moved faster than the body can follow. But they were alive. Most of them were alive. Caleb scanned fast. He saw Harlan's men, not 5, 6. One of them had their horses. 3 were on foot, moving through the camp with the arrogant ease of men who'd already won. A 4th was in conversation with someone Caleb couldn't see, behind a large rock. 2 Apache men were down, not moving. A 3rd was on his knees with his hands bound. It had happened recently, in the last hour. The fire was still hungry, not dying. "They are still here," Desta said. Her voice was a blade. "I see them," Caleb said. He took in the terrain. The rock walls on 2 sides were an advantage or a trap depending on which side of them you were on. The floor of the bowl gave Harlan's men good sight lines, but it also gave anyone on the mesa rim the high ground. "I need to get down there," Desta said. "Not yet," he said. "From up here we have everything. Down there you're just one more person they can put a gun on." She understood tactics. He could see her absorbing it, setting aside the part of her that wanted to run to her people and thinking coldly instead. "What do you propose?" she asked. "Give me 10 minutes, he said. "Can you shoot?" She gave him a look that answered that question without words. He handed her his spare pistol, checked his rifle, counted his ammunition. 12 rounds in the rifle, 6 in his sidearm, against 6 men who were armed and positioned. He'd faced worse odds with fewer options. Not often, but it had happened. When the first shot goes, the man with the horses will try to gather them, he said. That's your first shot. Take it. She checked the pistol with practiced hands, checking the cylinder, checking the action. Yes, she'd handled firearms before. There's a man behind the east rock, she said. I can see his shadow. Caleb looked. He hadn't caught that. Good eye. He has a rifle, she said. He will be watching the high ground. Then I won't come from the high ground, Caleb said. He moved Belle to a ground tie, left her at the rim, and descended the west face of the mesa on foot, slow, careful, using every feature of the rock as cover. The descent took 8 minutes. Felt like 8 years. He came in from the south, low, staying below the line of sight of the man behind the east rock, moving through a dry creek bed that gave him cover until he was 50 yards from the nearest of Harlan's men. He took a breath. 2 counts. Then he raised the rifle. The first shot dropped the man by the burning structure cleanly. By the time the crack reached the camp, Caleb had already moved and was sighting the second target. From the mesa rim, a pistol shot rang out. The man moving toward the horses went down. Chaos erupted in the bowl below. Harlan's men broke in multiple directions. 2 behind cover, 1 toward the horses, 1 dropping flat. The Apache people scattered with speed and purpose. Not panicked running but disciplined dispersal. They'd been waiting. They just needed the fire from outside to give them the moment. What followed was 6 minutes of controlled chaos that Caleb would replay in his memory for years afterward. He moved through the bowl like a ghost, never stopping, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. Rifle, then sidearm. The man behind the east rock came around the wrong way and found Caleb already there, already waiting. He made a decision with his eyes that cost him everything. The Apache men who weren't down took the opportunity. 2 of them drove the remaining rider from the camp with a fury that even Caleb, who had seen men fight, found himself watching with something close to awe. By the time the sun touched the top of the west wall, it was done. 4 of Harlan's men were down. 2 had fled, riding hard and not looking back, in the direction of the cattle range country 2 days west. Caleb stood in the center of the camp, smoke still rising around him, and let out the breath he'd been holding. Desta was already moving through the people, touching shoulders, speaking quickly in Apache, finding her uncle, an older man with a bound wound across his chest, sitting propped against a rock, alive, barely, but with eyes still clear. She knelt in front of him, took his hands and spoke to him. And then, something that broke through every wall Caleb had built around himself in 3 years. The old man reached up, touched her face and began to cry. Caleb looked away, gave them that. He stood among the smoke and the settling dust and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They buried the dead as the stars came out. 2 Apache men, both young. One had a wife who didn't cry at the grave, just stood with her fists at her sides staring into the dark with eyes that had gone somewhere far away. The other had a younger brother, maybe 15, who helped dig without being asked and didn't speak a word the entire time. Caleb dug with them. No one told him to. No one asked him to. He just picked up a second tool and worked beside them, and nobody said a word about it, not in objection, not in welcome. He was simply there and the work needed doing, and so it got done together. There was a cleanliness to that, he thought, to being useful without needing to be acknowledged. Desta moved through the camp through the night, tending wounds, organizing, talking with the older men and women who formed the backbone of the group's decision-making. She moved with authority despite her own wound, despite the fresh lines of pain visible around her mouth and eyes. Nobody questioned her right to lead in her uncle's weakened state. They deferred to her naturally, the way people defer to someone who has earned it rather than claimed it. Caleb watched this from the edge of camp. He'd found a place by himself near the horses and was cleaning his rifle by firelight, the familiar mechanical routine of it steadying his hands and his thoughts. He was surprised when she came to him. She sat across from him without asking permission. Just sat. She was holding 2 clay cups of something that smelled of pine and something earthy he didn't recognize. She set one in front of him. He picked it up. It was warm. He drank. It was bitter and strong and tasted like the desert itself. "What is this?" he asked. "Medicine," she said. "It helps with pain." "I'm not hurt." "I know," she said. "It also helps with what sits in the chest. The kind of pain that is not in the body." He looked at her across the fire. She met his gaze steadily, without self-consciousness, without agenda. "You said something today," he said, "about what I need." She remembered. He could see it in her eyes. "I did. Is that what your people believe?" he asked. "That someone can see inside a stranger and know what they need?" "Some people," she said. "Not strangers. But some people are not strangers for long." She tilted her head slightly. "You knew within the first hour whether I was a person you could trust. I knew the same about you. We simply had more immediate concerns." Caleb turned the cup in his hands. The fire popped. In the distance, a child was crying softly, the kind of crying that comes after fear finally lets go. "I haven't stayed in one place more than 2 weeks in 3 years, he said. "I don't know if I know how to stop moving." "You have been riding away from something," she said. It wasn't an accusation. "Yes. What is on the other side of the desert when you ride away? What are you riding toward?" He thought about it. Really thought about it in the way he normally didn't allow himself to. "Nothing," he said finally. "There's nothing on the other side. Just the next town, the next job, the next open road." "Then you are not traveling," she said. "You are wandering. There is a difference." "I know," he said quietly. She was quiet for a moment. The fire moved between them. "My people will need to move," she said then. "Harlan's men who escaped will go back. He will send more. Perhaps with papers this time, legal claims, government men. That is the new way of taking what is not theirs. With papers instead of guns." Her voice held a controlled contempt for this that he understood deeply. "I need to get to Reyes at the trading post. I need to find people who know how those papers work and how to fight them." "Lawyers," he said. "If that is what they are called." She paused. "The road to Breckenridge is not safe. Harlan's territory runs north of here. His men will be watching." "I know a route," Caleb said. He'd said it before he'd decided to say it. It came from somewhere below decision-making. From some place in him that had been waiting, without his knowledge, for a reason to go somewhere specific instead of just somewhere else. Desta looked at him, the studying look, but softer now than it had been the day before. Less examination, more recognition. "You would guide us," she said. Not a question. An offering. A space she was creating for him to step into. "I would," he said. "It is dangerous," she said. "Harlan has a long reach." "I'm not scared of Harlan," he said. "No," she said quietly. "I think you are not scared of much that is outside you. The things that scare you live in here." She touched her own chest. "That is the harder territory." He was quiet for a long moment. "Desta," he said. She waited. "When I got to Breckenridge," he said. "When all this is done, what happens then?" She looked at him for a long time. The fire burned between them. Around them, her people moved through the aftermath of the day. Grieving, healing, rebuilding the immediate, doing what people do when the world has broken them a little and they must continue. "That depends," she said, "on what you decide you want to happen. And if I don't know yet, then you keep writing," she said. "But perhaps not alone this time." She rose, picked up her empty cup, and walked back toward the camp. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Caleb sat for a while longer by the dying fire. Above him, the stars burned enormous and indifferent and beautiful. The desert was quiet in the way it only gets after something has passed through and taken its due. He thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. He thought about the man he was now. He thought about the distance between those two men, and whether it was really as far as he'd been telling himself. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't sure the answer was yes. They rode out before sunrise. The whole camp moved slow, careful, deliberate. The old and the young and the wounded, guided east by stars and by Desta, who rode at the front and knew this land the way most people only know their own names. Caleb rode at the flank. He didn't lead. It wasn't his place to lead. But he was there, eyes on the ridgelines, rifle across the saddle, watching the spaces between things the way only someone who has learned to fear the spaces between things can do. They were 3 days on the trail to Breckenridge. Hard days, cold nights. 2 moments where Caleb's eyes caught movement on distant hills that might have been Harlan's scouts and might have been shadows. He said nothing both times, but he shifted their route. And both times, whatever it was that might have been something stayed in the distance and fell away. On the 3rd evening, they came over a rise and saw the lights of the trading post below, warm yellow squares against the purple desert dusk. Desta pulled her horse up alongside Caleb. They sat there for a moment, looking down at it. "We made it," he said. "We did," she agreed. He glanced at her. In 3 days on the trail, he'd watched her lead 30 people through dangerous territory, with a wound in her side and grief she hadn't yet had time to process. Watched her make decisions quickly and fairly. Watched her sit with a frightened child for an hour, saying nothing, just being present. Watched her navigate the invisible hierarchies of her community with wisdom and restraint. He thought about what she'd said that first night on the mesa. "You need a woman like me." He'd thought at the time that she was being direct to the point of arrogance. He understood now that she'd simply been telling the truth. The way she told all truths, plainly, without decoration, and without apology. He did need a woman like her. He needed someone who didn't let him disappear into himself. Who spoke to what was real instead of what was comfortable. Who had seen the worst things and kept going anyway, not because the pain wasn't real but because other things were more real than the pain. The question was whether he was a man worth needing. That, he thought, was something he was going to spend a long time figuring out. But for the first time in 3 years, he was willing to stay in one place long enough to try. Below them, the lights of Breckenridge waited. Desta rode down first. And Caleb Doon, wanderer, drifter, man running from a weight he'd finally found somewhere to set down, followed her into the light. Some people come into your life like a storm, violent and sudden and changing everything. And when the storm passes, you find that the wreckage it left behind is actually the foundation of something new. Caleb had ridden into that desert looking for nothing. And the desert, in its strange and merciless wisdom, had given him everything. What would you have done in his place? Would you have ridden on? Or stayed? Tell me in the comments. And if the story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs it tonight.